everyone, and welcome to our very first episode of Histories and Mysteries. On this podcast, start that over. Hey everyone, and welcome to our very first episode of Histories and Mysteries, a comedy podcast where fuck me. Third time's a charm.
Okay, I believe in you.
Hey everyone, and welcome to our very first episode of Histories and Mysteries, a podcast where two ladies with a morbid fascination of the world's odd and eerie histories and mysteries come together to tell stories each week. I'm one of your hosts, Ashley. I'm from the USA. I use she, her pronouns, and I will now let my co-host introduce herself.
Hey everybody, my name is Jessica and I am from Canada. I also use she, her pronouns.
For our first episode, we thought it would be fun if we each did a story on the other's capital city. So I'm going to do a story from Ottawa, Canada on Ardeth Wood and the murder of her.
And I'm going to be doing a story from Washington, D.C. on the St. Elizabeth's Asylum.
I'm very excited. I don't want to say I love asylums because that's weird, but I find them really fascinating.
They are really fascinating. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm just going to get right into it. One of the things I want to first call out are my sources that I used. A lot of this comes from Murder She Solved, which is this really kind of cool show that I watched. It's a documentary, and they've got all kinds of different episodes. But they had one episode focusing completely on Ardeth Wood. And I was telling Jessica before we started recording that I loved the Canadian accents in it. It was great. I'm always a little disappointed, Jessica, when I talk to you because you don't have a really thick Canadian accent.
Did you want me to put one on there, eh?
Perfect. Hey, have you ever heard the joke how Canada got its name?
Nope.
Okay, so they put a bunch of letters in a can and they pulled them out and they pulled out CANADA and they got Canada. Do you get it?
I got it. That was a really wonderful joke.
I'm glad you liked it.
Oh, yes.
Also, I got it from another article from CBC News. It didn't have an author attached to it, so I can't give them specific credit, but it was from CBC News. So this is actually a really interesting story. I mean, unfortunately for Ardeth Wood and her family, it's a very sad story, but it takes place back in August of 2003. A 27-year-old student named Ardeth Wood decided to head home during a school break. She was working towards her PhD at the University of Waterloo. Have you heard of that one, Jessica?
I have. I actually think I applied there and I decided to go to school in Nova Scotia instead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had never heard of it, but I'm not Canadian, so
yeah, I visited there a few times. I had friends that lived there. The streets are kind of crazy. There a lot of straight, like you're going down the straight way and then all of a sudden it turns into a turn lane. So that's kind of anxiety inducing.
Oh, yeah, I would hate that. So while she was visiting her family in Orleans, Ardeth decided to go for a bike ride, and she did it all the time. She really enjoyed riding her bike, but she did have to borrow her brother's bike because she didn't have one at home. And she headed to the local bike path that she had ridden over several times. But today's ride, unfortunately, would be so different from all the others because today's ride would be her last and nobody would see her alive again. She had promised her mother that they would go shopping when she got home, but as the afternoon came and went, her family started to worry. They decided to go out and look for her along the bike path that they knew she would probably most likely take. But they couldn't find her, and they couldn't find the bike. They couldn't find her. They couldn't find any trace of her. And after several hours of searching with no luck, they decided it was time to call the police. And I guess a really big thunderstorm was coming through as well. So they really couldn't stay out there searching much longer. The next day, the police, I guess, were on top of things. And the next day, They had a search party of friends and neighbors, all of that stuff. They formed and they met at the Aviation Museum. And they had to search about 200 kilometers of bike paths. And for my American friends, that's 124 miles. So they had a lot of ground to cover. They continued to search. And at this point, she was still considered a missing person. But the officers that they interviewed in the documentary said that they really had little hope that she was still alive. Her friends and boyfriend, on the other hand, were praying that they would get a phone call from her any minute, as one does. But unfortunately, the officers just had little to go on. She didn't have a complicated past. She didn't have enemies. She never got in trouble with the law. She didn't have a criminal history. They really couldn't find any motive for why she would go missing. So because of that and the fact that she, had a boyfriend, she had friends, she was working on her PhD, they really suspected that it was foul play that took her away and not, her deciding to leave and not tell anyone. That just wasn't like her. But they really couldn't find any suspect that they really could kind of lean into. So they decided to turn to the public for help. And within minutes of releasing the tip line, the phone started ringing. One phone call seemed to hold some of the answers the police were looking for. A young woman was heading east on her bike, and a male stopped her to ask her some questions. The same afternoon, Ardeth went missing. She said he was very nice looking, and she made a point to say that he was shirtless. So that's what she was focused on.
Yeah.
But she did say that as soon as he started talking, he was pretty creepy.
Gross.
Apparently he tried getting her to follow him down an isolated pathway, but she apparently was a true crime podcast fan because she was like, no.
Good girl.
Yeah. So she said no thank you and took off. But get this, he started following her, like pursuing her. I would shit my pants. I'd be so scared. But he finally let her.
That's why you carry a weapon on you when you go for a walk.
Yeah, sadly, that's a really good idea. He finally left her alone when they got to a neighborhood where there was undoubtedly, a lot of witnesses around. And so he finally kind of left. She remembered enough to work with a forensic artist, and they were able to get a sketch of the subject. This forensic artists fascinate me because I think it would be so hard, one, for a witness. I mean, you've seen all that research on witness testimony and how it isn't very reliable. But for someone to be able to remember features well enough to be able to tell them to a sketch artist, and a sketch artist just from hearing it to be able to create what this person looks like, that's crazy to me.
Well, exactly. Especially if you've undergone a trauma. It will be hard to recall those memories, right? Especially specific details that they need.
Yeah, for sure. It's fascinating to me how they're able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But they were, thankfully, and they did get a sketch. But no one in Ardeth's circle recognized him. And so he seemed like he may have had a link to her case, but since they really had no concrete evidence that this was the same guy, it could have just been, another creeper on the bike path. They held off releasing it to the public. Although, I probably should have warned the public because I don't know you want this creep that's like following women just willy-nilly around in the park.
But at the same time, if you warn the public, then there's going to create that pandemonium effect, right? And
that's
then
true.
If they release that information, then the suspect's going to become more cautious and probably won't try and commit the offense again, right? So if they think that they haven't been caught, they're going to get cocky and be like, okay, I can do this again.
Yeah, that's true. That's 100% a good point. So unfortunately, they really didn't have much to go on. But then the police received a phone call from a 16-year-old girl who was positive that she saw Ardeth on the bike path the morning she went missing. She said she heard a scream and tried to look further into the bush area. She said she saw Ardeth talking to a man who looked extremely agitated. So the 16-year-old thought that they might just be boyfriend and girlfriend, and she didn't want to interrupt. But, she was also a true crime fan because she followed them down the path to see if Ardeth was going to be okay. I mean, girls watch out for girls, right?
I love it.
I know. So she catches up to the bikes where they were now abandoned on the side of the path, and she listened closely, but she didn't hear anything. And apparently she had put in 911 on her phone, but she never actually dialed it.
Oh.
Do you guys use 911 in Canada, or do you have a different number?
It's 911. Yeah, no, it's still 911 here.
Yeah, because I know, like, over in England, it's 999.
Yeah, no, we're 911 for sure.
Okay. She had it dialed on her phone, but decided not to call. And she probably just assumed she was overreacting. Like, I just saw boyfriend and girlfriend fighting. Like, I need to calm down. But ladies, trust your gut. Never assume you are overreacting because your gut tells you things for a reason. She said it started to storm, and so she headed home. As she was leaving, she heard another scream, but decided to keep going. I'm not sure why. But, I mean, she was 16, so she probably just didn't know what to do.
Well, exactly. And I mean, if you heard a scream, I wouldn't want to run towards it. I'd want to run away from it, unfortunately.
Yeah, especially as a 16-year-old. But they kept calling her, in the documentary, they kept calling her a woman. And I was like, she's 16. She's a teenager. Let's calm down with that.
16-year-olds look a little different than we did back in the day.
Oh my gosh, right? They're gorgeous.
I know. It's not fair.
So the police showed the composite of that guy, the creepy one from the bike path, and the 16-year-old woman confirmed it was the same guy she saw with Ardeth. So now they had a little bit to go on. They narrowed down the search area to where the teen had seen Ardeth and continued to search in that area. Now, this is super creepy, and I have a theory for why this next part happened that I'll tell you at the end because I don't want to give it away.
Okay.
But the police receive another phone call from a phone booth on the other side of this river. So I guess where the bike paths are, there's like a city and then a river, and then there's like another city on the other side, and there's a bridge there. And so on the other side, where Ardeth went missing, there was a phone booth, and the police received a phone call from this phone booth, and the only thing the man on the other end said was, "It was an accident. I didn't mean to kill her. I took her across the river and I buried her."
Ew.
Yeah. Can you imagine getting that phone call?
No, I don't enjoy that because it's very ominous, right? And
yeah.
Then you don't know if it's the same case that you're working on or if it's someone completely different. And that would just be creepy to me.
I just feel like it would make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Like, ooh.
Exactly.
So, meanwhile, the police received another phone call. This case is very heavily phone call tips. But they received another phone call from another lady who had talked to that same man on the bike path. This lady said the man told her he was from a small town outside Ottawa named, you're going to have to help me with just Jessica, Plantagenet? Yeah.
Plantagenet, yes.
Plantagenet. They said it in the documentary.
It's Alfred Plantagenet. I may be butchering it, but that is basically how it's said.
Okay. Well, you're probably going to have to help me with it again because I heard it in the documentary several times. I can't say it because I'm awful at French. So the police did narrow down their search to Greens Creek, and they found the bike that Ardeth was riding. So they then brought out cadaver dogs who quickly found Ardeth's body, unfortunately.
Oh, no. Poor girl.
Yes. Yeah, so they found her body about 5 days after she had gone missing. And this discovery concluded Ottawa's largest search effort in the history of the city. So I'm not sure if that has changed since 2003, but at that time, it was the largest one in Ottawa's history. So they obviously performed an autopsy on her, and the autopsy revealed that she had green algae in her lungs, which means she was drowned in the creek. She was found naked, but thankfully there was no evidence of sexual assault. And they found nothing else. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing. So the officers decided to release the picture of the bike path ban. They finally decided to release that. Once they released that, they received 1,000 tips in 2 days.
Wow.
And unfortunately, after working through all of these tips, none of them became useful. So again, the police had this picture of this man, and that's about all they had. They also decided to finally release some information that they had been holding back. And they released the fact that the suspect had a bird tattoo on his shoulder. Once this was released, police said that they received calls from people who just knew someone that had a bird tattoo anywhere. Like, the detective was saying it didn't matter if it was his shoulder, face, thigh, leg. If there was a bird tattoo, they were calling it in.
That's so wild.
I know.
Like, that's not helpful. It's not what they said.
No. Right. Pay attention. Don't waste their time. But, I mean, they were trying to be helpful.
Exactly. Us Canadians are always wanting to help.
You guys are known for being very nice.
Yes.
Except for your murderers. Other than that.
This is very true.
So at this point, they have about 4,000 tips to sort through, and they spent months going through all of them. April 2004 came around, so this was about 8 months after Ardeth's death, and they get a tip from a biker who passed by a man who looked like the guy in the picture. This man had already been interviewed in the beginning of the investigation, so they decided that they would give him a second interview.
No.
Yeah.
Good.
Police say that he seemed very nervous and something just seemed off about his answers. He did have a similar bird tattoo, and he went to the same school as the suspect on the bike path that was the one seen with Ardeth. Police said that he had a lot of anger, and a quote from him was, "I'm a scorpion under a rock. You never know what they're going to do."
Ew.
Yeah. Do what you will with that, but creepy.
I don't understand that saying.
Yeah. I think he just meant that I'm crazy. Like, you don't know what I'm going to do next, but I don't really understand how that would help his case.
Yeah.
So they decided to bring him in for a polygraph. And how do you feel about polygraphs, Jessica?
I just don't really think that they're super accurate, honestly, because there's so many TV shows and there's so much information out there now that, and even back then, I guess, that could tell you how to beat a polygraph, right? It's all about controlling your breath and believing what you say is true, and then you can pass it, right? So it's not 100% accurate in determining if someone is lying or not.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, and they always talk about polygraphs and, how they just aren't very accurate and you should never take one because you just never know. But I think it can sometimes help police kind of get on the right track, but I definitely don't think that they're super accurate or can really be relied on.
Yeah.
But this guy did pass the polygraph test. No problems, passed it with flying colors. So they decided to kind of put him on the back burner. One summer evening in 2004, a man approached a young lady walking down the street. The man and woman started chatting, and she asked him for a cigarette. He said sure, but they'd have to go back to his place where he had some, which, oh, no, honey, don't do that.
Ew.
And as soon as they entered the building, he dragged her to the laundry room and sexually assaulted her.
Oh, honey.
Police on this case had a suspect named Christopher Myers, but they really didn't have any evidence. I don't know if he didn't leave any DNA evidence or, how that worked. They didn't really mention why. They just said that they didn't have any evidence for this sexual assault. So Ardeth Wood's investigators hear about this case, and they realize that they had interviewed Christopher Myers before for Ardeth's murder, but he had an alibi of hanging out with a friend and then going to work. But since he's a suspect in a sexual assault, they decided, like, hey, maybe we should look at him again. And so they decided to go ahead and interview him again. Unfortunately, he disappeared for almost a year.
No.
Yeah, they could not find him. When they finally track him down a year later, they go straight to his apartment. And one of the detectives on the case noticed that when he spoke that he had very crowded teeth. And he thought back to one of the witnesses on Ardeth's case who said it was like the man had too many teeth in his mouth. So he started to feel a little glimmer of hope that, maybe things were lining up for him. They also had another piece of evidence they could use to identify him, that bird tattoo. They asked him to take his shirt off to see if he had any tattoos anywhere, and he decided he would oblige, and he took his shirt off, but he didn't have a bird tattoo. Yeah, so, but, they decided, you know what, something's off with this guy. We're going to have him take a polygraph test anyway. And he agreed, but he never showed up for it.
Of course not.
Right. So investigators are like, that's suspicious. Let's take another look at this alibi of his. So Meyer's landlady said she saw him late that morning, and then he had a shift at his job at 3:30. So the question is, could he bike to the scene of the murder, have time to murder someone, and then get to his job on time? One of the investigators decided to take the bike path himself and see how much time he had. And he was able to bike that path with no problem, with a ton of time to spare. So it was easily doable for this guy to be able to do that and get to work on time. But without any hard evidence, they really couldn't do much yet. One night in April 2005, a young woman was walking down the street. She was approached by a man riding a bike, and he tried to start a conversation with him, but she wasn't really into it. So she's like, go away, creep. Thanks, but no thanks. And he started to leave, but he came back around and tried to attack her. She fought him off, and he ended up running off with his purse. And because he ran off with the purse, they categorized this crime as just a robbery, not like an attack. So it never really got to the Ardeth detectives. So they hadn't really heard about that. But on May 11th, 2005, so about a month later, a young woman was yet again approached by a man. He tries to talk to her. He asks for a street that he was looking for. She points him in that direction. And again, he starts to head that way, but circles back, attacks her, and tries to sexually assault her in a bush. But thankfully, a local homeowner heard her screams and came out to see what was going on. The man quickly fled the scene, and he left his cell phone there.
Yes.
So they finally had something, and they were able to trace the phone back to a woman who, drumroll, had a son named Christopher Myers. So police arrest Myers for the sexual assault, and Ardeth's investigators head to the station to interview him. Chris obviously denies everything, so the investigators again ask him to take a polygraph, and he agrees again. But this time they're like, you know what? We're going to take you there. So
good idea.
Yeah. So they bring him back to Ottawa for the test, and they also at the same time decide to interview his ex-girlfriend. And she did not have nice things to say about him. She said that he was physically abusive and sexually aggressive towards her friends. Sounds like a real great guy.
That's gross.
Yeah. And she said he would often bike paths during the day and streets at night. So, I mean, this fits that he was biking a path during the day when Ardeth went missing. And then at night, he was biking the streets when those ladies were sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
And the polygraph also showed that he was lying every single time he said he did not murder Ardeth. And they asked him a bunch of times in a bunch of different ways. He continues to deny it until they bring in the big guns. Martin Graham was a sergeant major, and they brought him in specifically for interrogating this guy. And his first tactic was to bring Chris back to a headspace of the day that Ardeth was murdered. So on the back of the investigation room, they posted his mugshot, the composite picture right below, and a map of the trail, the bike trail marked with different locations of where he and Ardeth were. But it didn't work. He said to the a quote from him to the sergeant major was, "You have nothing on me." So Graham, realizing he's right, switches tactics and tries to be more of a confidant, tries to be kind. And one of the interesting things I noted while watching this, because they showed video of the interrogation, and Graham was extremely close to Myers. Like, he was sitting just very close. It wasn't like he wasn't having a large physical presence over him because he was kind of hunched down, kind of talking close to Myers, but he was so close to him. And I wonder if that's not some type of tactic, to kind of get in their personal space and make them a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, that'd make me super uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. So he finally, using this new tactic, it worked. Apparently, Myers just needed a friend. And he starts to confess to meeting Ardeth on the bike path that day. Graham then has Myers draw a picture of the scene, and Myers puts himself on the bike path, gives details only the killer would know. He didn't say he murdered her or point out, like, this is the murder spot, but he tried to say that they hugged and kissed, and then he just ran off, and then somehow she ended up murdered. But he didn't do it,
That's the dumbest excuse I've ever heard.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
And investigators believe, and this is kind of where my theory comes in about why he made that phone call about, he didn't mean to kill her, was that he meant to sexually assault her like he did to those other women, but something went wrong. And the theory is that Ardeth was apparently a really good swimmer. So the theory is that she tried to jump into the river to get away, thinking that that was her way out, and he followed her in and ended up drowning her. So I don't think he had the intentions of murdering her, and that's why he called it, say, "Oh, I didn't mean to." Not that that's an excuse in any way, shape, or form.
No, I just think that it makes it even worse because she was trying to get away, and he so desperately needed to sexually assault her that he was doing everything he possibly could.
Yeah, 100%.
Like,
yeah.
I just feel that makes it so much worse, right?
Yeah.
Because you literally have to put in so much effort to go after this girl if she was trying to swim away, and then just killed her because you were so desperate to get what you wanted.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So one of the things that the investigators were still wondering about, though, was that tattoo. Because remember, the witness said that the man that was with Ardeth had the bird tattoo, and they had to ask Christopher Myers to take his shirt off, and he didn't have one. Well, do you remember those fake tattoos that we used to have when we were younger?
Yes, I loved those.
That you could, like, put on with water?
Yeah, those are the best.
Yeah. Apparently he did too.
No.
Yeah. Apparently he thought so too. And he used to stick them on all the time. And he had one that looked like an eagle.
Oh my goodness.
So he must have had a stick-on tattoo that day.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And you may or may not know. Do you know how old they both were?
Ardeth was 27. And Myers, I don't have his exact age, but I'm pretty sure he was in his 20s.
Okay. That's scary, considering, like, I'm going to be 27 soon, and it's just, it can happen to anybody, right? It's just scary to think about, and especially someone so young can do that.
It's crazy, yeah. Like, she was just going for a bike ride.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not.
That's why you're not what?
Oh. I said that's why I don't exercise.
Exercise, you get murdered. It seems cut and dry to me.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So many stories about runners gone missing and then turning up dead, or, bike riders.
Save your life. Don't exercise.
So go on a walk. Yeah, exactly. And if you have a little bit of extra meat on you, then you'll be too heavy to be carried away.
Perfect. You hear that, everyone?
If you want to live longer, be fit. But don't, because you'll get murdered.
Exactly. It's 50-50 chance. You'll either live longer because you're fit or
Please
you
cut
won't.
that out.
So at first, Myers was originally charged with first-degree murder, which does not allow parole for at least 25 years. So it's pretty good.
Yeah.
He then took a plea deal. And on January 8th, 2008, he was sentenced to second-degree murder in exchange for confessing to several other sexual assaults. And his sentence was life in prison with no chance for parole for 10 years. This is the soonest second-degree murder can be eligible for parole. And he had already served 2 years waiting for trial. So he was really eligible for parole after 8 years.
I don't like that.
Yeah, me neither. That is just way too short. The prosecution lawyer said that it made sense because they didn't have a lot of concrete evidence against him. And so he was afraid that if they did go to trial, that there was a possibility that they would lose. And at least this way, they're getting him behind bars in some sense of the form.
That's true,
Yeah. So I wanted to read this quote from Ardeth's mom because I just thought it was really beautiful. She said, God desires not the death of the sinner, but that he be converted and live. She said, it's sad to see a man so young have this happen to him, and he's had a very difficult life from the beginning. So I just hope that his prison years will help him to reform and that he can pay back the debt, perhaps, that he owes to his mother, who has been with him through all of this. It must be very difficult for her.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't imagine saying something so empathetic to someone that murdered my daughter.
Yeah.
I just think that takes such strength that I just don't know that I have.
Well, it just shows her level of faith, right? And how much she believes and trusts in God, and, how everything happens for a reason, and not to blame others for heinous acts, I guess, and just make sure that they know the same love that you put out into the world, right?
Yeah. I just thought that was a really cool quote. And one of the things I want to do really quick before I end here is the Ottawa Citizen has an article by Dan Butler. Just a little bit, he goes into the origins of Chris Myers, because in that quote, she says that, he had a difficult life from the beginning. So I was kind of wondering what happened. And apparently he had an alcoholic mother. I'll cut that around that. He had an alcoholic mother who drank while she was pregnant with him. So he was born with fetal alcohol syndrome. He also had ADHD, PDD, which is pervasive development disorder. It's on the spectrum of social and communication disorders that includes autism. He also had schizoid personality traits, which for those that don't know, that's where they kind of avoid social activities, constantly shy away from interaction, and they have a very limited range of emotional expression. So he went to counseling a lot once he was placed in the foster system. His foster parents would send him to counseling. And one of the counselors said that he was the most disturbed child he had ever seen, which, holy, yeah. He was adopted around the age of 4, but by the age of 12, his adopted family couldn't handle him anymore. And so he went back into foster care. By 2000, he was living on the streets until he finally found a job as a dishwasher and a place to live with roommates, where he began his decline into crime.
That's sad.
So that is the story of the Murder of Ardeth Wood.
I mean, not woohoo, but good job. Good story. I was going to say someone could take that as being really wrong, but
oh man,
good job. The best thing ever.
Murder!
Oh my gosh, I'm going to hell.
All right, I'm really excited to hear about the asylum.
Well, I hope I do it justice. Uh-oh. My mic almost fell on my face. That's okay.
That's not good.
All right. So I'm going to be talking about St. Elizabeth's Asylum in Washington, D.C. I used multiple different resources that I found online. So hopefully they're accurate. I got a lot of information from the Washington Post article about it and medium.com. There's also WAMU.org. I don't know what they are. I think it was the Washington Museum, actually. And then there is one about the architecture of the asylum and the history of the U.S. and treatment of its mental illness. And then savingplaces.org, because I'll explain later. And then the government archives as well. So St. Elizabeth's was founded in 1855 as the government hospital for the insane.
Oh, wow. That was a long time ago.
It was a very long time ago. I can't even imagine that long ago, honestly, but your history is a lot older than our history.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still crazy. I always find it fascinating when things happen in the 1800s or earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was nestled in southeast DC on more than 350 acres of land, which is a lot of land.
Yeah, that's a ton.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy. It became St. Elizabeth's. So the name was changed in 1916 after 61 years of it being opened because many wounded soldiers suffering from trauma were housed and treated there. These soldiers lived temporarily in the unfinished East Wing in tents on the grounds, which is kind of sad considering they're trying to recover from the trauma of war, and here they are sleeping in tents on the ground.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah, but it was the first federally funded mental institution in the nation. So a lot of times the mental institutions and asylums were governmentally funded as opposed to federally. So it was the local government's responsibility to fund these places and keep them operational. But because it was located in DC, it was federally funded, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Yeah, so since it was largely funded by Congress, it served patients who were considered to be wards of the federal government instead of being the sole care of the local governments, which I stated earlier. So St. Elizabeth's came into being because of one lady, and she was pretty cool. Her name was Dorothea Dix. Have you ever heard of her?
I have not, but she sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah, so she was a 19th century reformer who fought for St. Elizabeth's. She had gone around to all the different mental institutions and jails in the area, and she saw how mistreated they all were, and how disgusting their living arrangements were. And she thought that it was just inhumane and sought to create a better environment for all of these individuals because they deserve just as much of a normal lifestyle as anybody else does.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome.
Yeah, she's pretty great. I thought that was super cool of her because she fought for it. She kept getting turned down. She's like, no, this is happening. This is what we're going to do. And she made it happen, which was pretty great. So when they finally gave the green light for St. Elizabeth's, she wanted to ensure that the patients had access to lots of natural light and views to the outside world so that they didn't feel trapped in their environment. Because I would feel really trapped if I had a bunch of bars on my windows and I could never go anywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so she wanted to make sure that they didn't feel like they were in a mental institution and that they were just somewhere where they could get better and feel better. It was an ornate Victorian structure. It had sun-filled rooms and it had spacious grounds. And it was built to serve around 250 patients, which seems like a lot.
Yeah.
In the 1850s, it was largely believed that beauty was a large component to treating the mentally ill, and asylums were therefore built to be beautiful, which is what she
Oh,
sought for, which was pretty great. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's nice that it was like a little bit of niceness at the beginning.
Yeah.
uh, I just think it's really great because not a lot of mentally ill patients get that recognition or get that support that they need, especially back then when it was all so new. So it's nice to see that something good came out of it for once, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah, that's really pretty.
Yes. It was believed that if patients were taken from the stress of their everyday lives and their home and then placed in this beautiful building, that it would help to ease their minds and assist them in getting better. It was actually St. Elizabeth's kind of like how they did everything. They were basing it off of this kind of treatment of their patients, which is really awesome. And
Yeah.
it was deemed an exceptional hospital that provided the most humane care, which is really unheard of for that time.
Yeah. Yeah, because that time period, mental asylums were not known to be great in any way, shape, or form.
Exactly. So, I mean, it didn't come without its flaws, as we'll get into later, but it began with this idea that they wanted to provide the most humane care and be the most exceptional hospital in the country, essentially. So a doctor at the hospital believed that St. Elizabeth's would be the model for how all asylums should be for the rest of the nation. And since they were the wow, I can't speak words today.
Words are
Since they
hard.
were the national, they are hard. It's like 10:30 my time, so I'm really tired. Uh, since they were the national hospital, staff and medical professionals needed to ensure they were keeping up with the medical advances in regards to mental illnesses. This was their opportunity to prove that Americans could keep up with the likes of the French, British, and German medical professionals. Patients had single rooms, and there were sitting and dining rooms in most halls. For years, the hospital achieved its goal of being the leader in mental health care, and the first 5 superintendents of this hospital were elected president of the American Psychiatric Association.
Wow, that's really awesome.
So, well, exactly, right? And I mean, they had to have been doing something right if the first 5 superintendents of this place were elected one of the highest regards, right?
Right, yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool. So we're getting into kind of where things went a little bit wrong.
Uh-oh.
So the patients that were housed here were not getting any better. That was because they had chronic issues, which they weren't necessarily aware of back then. They thought that
Oh,
patients could just be treated almost immediately, and not that sometimes people have health issues that'll last for their whole lives, right?
right.
So they never took that into consideration when building this place. So nobody was leaving.
So they thought it was kind of more like a cold where you get sick, you get over it, and you go.
Exactly. And so they never built this place to accommodate that amount of people. So they had all these original patients and none of them were leaving. But despite this,
Oh gosh.
patients kept coming in and they were always at an influx. So, due to this overcrowding and understaffing, which usually tends to be the case, unfortunately,
Yeah, for sure.
sentiment was turned against them.
Oh no.
So, yeah, so the nation was so impressed by this hospital and they were so on board with it. They were loving that they were helping out these people, these patients, but then it just kept getting more and more crowded. They weren't getting properly taken care of because there wasn't enough staff to accommodate them. So that was a big problem. So there already wasn't a lot of staff at this hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And by World War II, the staff were sent off to war. And the population at this hospital grew to over 7,000 people.
Oh my gosh. And it was only supposed to hold 250?
Exactly.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it grew to over 7,000 for a building that was only supposed to serve 250.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So they were way overpopulated, severely understaffed because their staff were sent off to war. So it was just getting worse and worse. And so as the hospital began to overcrowd, day rooms and corridors became places for patients to sleep. And the single rooms, which had typically been private rooms for only one person, often had 3 people residing inside of them.
Ugh.
Yeah, so that would be super uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can't imagine being an adult that's already dealing with something, having a room with 2 other adults that are dealing with their own, medical issues, and that'd be tough.
Exactly. So it was just not getting better for them, and their population was aging because people weren't leaving due to their chronic illnesses. And so they needed to build geriatric facilities to house those patients. So then they weren't in the same building as the younger folk. So the hospital also expanded to the land across the road from the original building. The new section was referred to as the East Campus,
Okay.
and the older original wing was referred to as the West Campus. Now, a Dr. William Allinson White led the hospital beginning in 1903. He moved the hospital from moral treatment and into a newer era, one that involves psychotherapy. Do you know what that is?
I don't. Kind of.
So basically, what it is it's talking therapy.
Okay.
Talking things through and like getting a sense of what's going on through that.
So kind of what we have now when we think of traditional therapy.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
I think that there is a little bit more to it, and it was a little more archaic back then, but that's essentially what it was, is talking therapy.
Gotcha, okay.
And then he also involves psychology, which is the study of the human mind. So
I feel like I should have known that because my undergrad is in psychology, so...
Girl.
Big fail on my... you said it and I was like, it sounds so familiar. I know it and I know I should know it, but I don't.
Yeah. So he also began patient newspapers, which is really cool. He created beauty parlors. Ooh la la.
Ooh.
And he also relieved overcrowding by having several other buildings erected on the site. Which, I mean, why wouldn't you, considering you have 350 acres of land?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, there were different treatments that were performed here. Some of them were good. Some of them were not so good. So the good ones were dance therapy.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So they thought that like dancing and just being free and listening to music was going to help them feel better and loosen up. And it was just a really cool thing to have. And everyone was involved and performing this dance therapy, which I think is just awesome.
Yeah.
Another treatment that they had was hydrotherapy. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I haven't heard great things about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I haven't heard like super negative things about it, but it probably wasn't great the way that they did it back then.
I feel like a lot of the treatments back then had, good intentions, but weren't necessarily very humane.
Exactly. So I think that we still have like a type of hydrotherapy now. It's like those hydro chambers, essentially, like the sensory deprivation chambers. But back then, they used to basically wrap the bodies up in soaking wet blankets and try and do it that way. Like, it was just very odd.
Yeah, I don't think I would like that.
No, it looked like it was a bunch of like mummies wrapped up, and it was just really crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for, like, I really enjoy taking baths, but, like, I don't think I wanna be wrapped up in a blanket that's eventually gonna be cold, right? And you're just,
No.
like, laying there wrapped up, you can't move.
Exactly.
No, I wouldn't like that at all.
No, it wouldn't be very fun, and I
Yeah.
think that I would panic.
Yeah, I think it would probably induce a lot of panic in people.
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, they also had electroshock therapy.
Ooh.
Typical for back then, however, very unfortunate. It just scrambles your brains, and I don't really think that it does too much other than destroy the person that you already are.
So I used to work at a home for older women that had schizophrenia and bipolar. This was, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago. And we did have one patient that had electroshock therapy, but one of the good things about it now is that they put you under for it. So you're not awake while they're shocking your brain. And I mean, I don't know much about it past that. I do know that, before her actual treatment, um, she would get very aggressive, very angry, and then after it, she was much more calm, and I don't know if that was her personality and it was getting her back to her personality or if it was just forcing her to be docile. I'm really not sure, so I don't know much more than that, but I do know that we did have one patient that still received electric shock therapy for her mental illness.
It's very fascinating because, like, for something like that, you don't think of it as being a modern day thing, but it's interesting to know that they put her under so that she wasn't directly feeling
Yeah,
it,
for
right?
sure.
So that's always really cool. All good things must come to an end.
Oh, no.
Yeah, unfortunately. By 1923, St. Elizabeth's had been investigated 3 times for mismanagement and charges of patient abuse.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah, exactly. So, despite initially wanting to treat the patients morally, as the mental health field progressed, so did the mistreatment of patients, which we unfortunately see all too often. I'm not entirely sure the specifics of these charges or exactly what happened, or if they were officially charged, because it said that they had only been investigated for these things. So
Gotcha.
I'm not entirely sure of the outcome of it, but even to this day, previous employees state, because it's still operational, so even to this day, employees still say that it was like the best place that they've ever worked at. They loved it there, and the way that they treated their patients was just unheard of. So I'm not entirely sure if those allegations were true or not.
Gotcha.
President John F. Kennedy made the first steps towards deinstitutionalizing these types of facilities in 1963. However, his assassination prevented his administration from overseeing this.
Oh.
Yeah, so he was trying to deinstitutionalize all like the mental health facilities and hospitals, and he wanted these people treated fairly, right?
Right.
And a lot of them weren't treating their patients as they should. So, however, President Jimmy Carter then followed up with the Mental Health Act. Oh my goodness. We have the Mental Health Act here, so that threw me off a little bit. He followed up with the Mental Health Systems Act in 1980. And then in 1980, President Ronald Reagan reallocated the federal dollars to block grants, which meant some mentally ill were released into the streets, and this also included patients from St. Elizabeth's.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so this hospital was trying to keep their patients there and treat them as morally as possible, but because their federal dollars were finally taken away, they weren't able to house everybody anymore.
Oh, that's so sad. I bet a lot of them ended up homeless just without any support.
Exactly. Yeah, so a lot of them were just on the streets because some of them didn't have family anymore, and it was just awful.
That's awful.
Yeah. So St. Elizabeth's was deinstitutionalized in the 1970s and 1980s. However, the East Campus continued to treat patients as a hospital.
Oh, like a medical hospital?
Yeah, so they still house mental health patients, but they have about 300 patients instead of the 7,000 plus. Yeah. So, East Campus was transferred to the district in 1987, where it still operated and treated those patients. And there were 75 buildings that became idle and unused.
Wow, that's a ton of buildings that are they used now or are they still just sitting there?
They're still just sitting there. So
it's really creepy.
Yeah, so the West Campus, it is now home to the Department of Homeland Security, which also includes the U.S. Coast Guard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy because this place looks super creepy.
I feel like all kind of like older buildings, they're either really absolutely just gorgeous or super fucking creepy.
Exactly. And like it was so beautiful back in its time, but now like a lot of the buildings are dilapidated. So like especially the center building, it's not very intact anymore, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah. So in addition to the Department of Homeland Security, the buildings will also become house condos.
Oh.
House
okay.
condos? Yeah, I don't know why I said it like that. And over 100 buildings sit vacant, and 52 buildings on the West Campus will be remodeled into those condos.
That's cool that they're kind of like reusing what they already have existing.
Exactly. And then like the other campus is still being used as the hospital, right? So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's considered a national landmark and a DC historic landmark.
Oh,
which is
yeah.
awesome. Yeah. Fun little fact.
Yeah.
And like I said, the hospital is still operational and you can even volunteer there.
Very cool.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to volunteer at St. Elizabeth's, please go ahead and let us know how it is because that would be super
Yeah, that'd
cool.
be really cool.
And I wish I lived closer. I wish I lived closer to DC so that I could volunteer there.
Yeah, and if you volunteer there and you have any ghost stories, definitely want to hear those.
Yes, please send those to us. But that is my story on St. Elizabeth's Asylum.
That was awesome. I loved that story.
Yeah, it was really interesting because it just shed like a different light on the different hospitals, right?
Yeah.
And how not everywhere is heinous treatment.
Yeah, for sure. I like that. Awesome. Well, one of the things we wanted to do at the top, but we forgot till now, was kind of mention. So Jessica and I are both big podcast fans. We listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to them all the time. And so we kind of wanted to talk real quick about some of them that inspired us to start this podcast. And for me, I really, really love Let's Go to Court. It's a podcast about court cases. It's hosted by Kristen and Brandy, and they are hilarious and just really great podcasters. And so they really kind of inspired me, as well as True Crime Obsessed. That one's also really cool. It's got Patrick and Jillian, and they watch true crime documentaries and then kind of go over the documentaries during the podcast. Both of them are funny. Both podcasts are hilarious. And it is kind of the two that pushed me into starting my own. There's several other podcasts I listen to. So if anybody ever wants any good podcast recommendations, just let me know. I've listened to just a million in one podcast.
That's awesome. I've also listened to Let's Go to Court, and it's really cool. I really like the dynamic between the two hosts. I think it's really cool. So you got me onto that one.
They're so good. I love those ladies.
They're so good, and they're so much fun. I really enjoy the podcast Crime Junkie. It's hosted by Ashley Flowers, and it's co-hosted by Britt Prawat. I don't know how to say her last name, and I'm so sorry if I butchered it. But they're just two really good friends. They've known each other since birth. They were born on the same day, which I find really cool. And they're both really interested in true crime. So their stories are just so interesting. They take so long to research them themselves, about 30 hours per week to research, write, edit, and then prepare to release these episodes. So they're just so fascinating, so full of fact. And it's just a really awesome and wholesome podcast to listen to. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's an awesome one too.
Yeah. And then the podcast that Ashley and I both really enjoy and kind of we met through the groups for this podcast is And That's Why We Drink. It was actually the very first podcast I ever listened to, so I've been hooked since the beginning. It's so fascinating, and Christine and Em are both so funny and just have really good chemistry together.
Yeah, they really do have a great chemistry.
So, and it's really cool because it's true crime and paranormal. So Christine will talk about true crime stories every week, and Em will talk about paranormal, spooky stories every week, and it's just really cool.
Yeah, that's a really good one. The podcast that got me started into podcasts was actually Surreal. And that I think that may have been the first podcast that I had ever really listened to. That really got me into them.
Is that Parcast or?
I think so. Yeah, it's about the Adnan Syed case.
Oh,
it's amazing, and it is really good. And then my husband also got me into My Dad Wrote a Porno. It is the most ridiculous, amazing, hilarious podcast. I mean, they had an HBO special, so it's huge. Like, it doesn't need to be plugged by any means. They're ginormous, gigantic, huge podcast. But if you like raunchy humor, it's amazing.
Yeah, and then speaking of just like raunchy humor, there's a podcast by Nicole Byers, and it's called Why Won't You Date Me? Or something along those lines, and she is so freaking funny. I just love her, and her podcast is great. She has different guest hosts every week, and it's just so funny. Like, she has me reeling all the time. She's so funny.
So those are some of our podcast inspirations. Like we said, if you need any other podcast recommendations, let us know. And we hope you join us next week, where we will be talking about the Salem witch trials, but more about witches in general around that time and kind of the psychology and fear behind witches of that time, and the Lizzie Borden case, which I'm really excited for, Jessica. That's going to be really awesome.
I'm really excited to talk about it because I found some really cool research on it, and there's some stuff that came up that I didn't even know about in the first place. So I'm really interested to share because I'm wondering if you know about it. So I'm excited.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. If you want more of us lovely ladies, you can find us on Facebook. We are Histories and Mysteries Podcast. It's the ampersand sign, so Histories ampersand Mysteries. You can also find us on
Instagram.
What's our handle for that?
We're so new to this. Please don't leave us.
Please love us.
Oh, jeepers. Okay, it's
Histories and Mysteries, just spelled out. So Histories and Mysteries. And then we are also on Facebook if you want to shoot us a message, or our emails on there as well. So if you need more of us until next week, feel free to find us on there. And thanks for joining.
Bye, everybody.